is those random acquaintances that make possible.
Welcome to the 6 Degrees Closer podcast. My name is Danny Jensen, and today we are going to do a quick little 6 Degrees Closer roadmap. What is this podcast? Who am I, and how can I explain this to you all? So who am I? I grew up in Evergreen, Colorado. I have 2 parents, Jeff and Celia. I have 3 siblings, Steve, Jenny, and Joe. Steve is the oldest. I'm second. My little sister is third, and the youngest is Joey, who is the fourth. So we grew up in Evergreen, Colorado. We ended up moving actually to Florida halfway through my high school career. And then in Florida, I ended up getting recruited to Ohio State, where I played soccer at Ohio State for about 4 years. At Ohio State, I was a business major, and this allowed me to open up a lot of doors. Ohio State has such a broad alumni base that essentially allowed me to kind of get where I'm at today. So you will notice on this podcast that I will actually have some Ohio State alumni join me on this podcast, as well as some family members, some friends, and hopefully see where this podcast takes us. So after I went to Ohio State, I then got into medical sales. I've been in medical sales now for about 5 years. And during COVID, I actually decided that I wanted to live in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is where my family currently resides as well. And so I've been down here for about 2 years. Since moving to Scottsdale, Arizona, I have picked up pickleball, which many people are starting to figure out as well. It is a fascinating sport. It is extremely fun to play. And I have kind of gotten too deep into it to where now I am basically what I consider a semi-professional, but I play pro tournaments and I focus a lot of my time onto pickleball. But the other thing is that I've focused a lot of my time now onto podcasting, and something that I just wanted to dive in a little bit deeper on. So going into that, some people are asking me, so why are you starting the 6 Degrees Closer podcast? This is a great question. It's really because of 2 things. I'm good at 2 things, and that's talking and talking more. So that's why I do this. So it gave me a little platform to be able to speak and do what I do best. And then on top of that, all jokes aside, I love to meet with people. I love to get to know people. I love to connect with others. And then the real thing is that I wanted to expand my own social circles, but do something that kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone, do something that's a little bit more interesting and something that I can actually remember myself and my time here, and hopefully share with others kind of what I get to experience. So it's very fun to do. And so that's kind of why I started the podcast. The idea came about just because I was thinking about, what would people want to podcast about? What would you do? And I figured that I would just go off of basically my interests and why, what I'd love to do, connect with others. And hopefully that will then lead us into the 6 Degrees Closer podcast, right? So, but how it really works. So how does the 6 Degrees Closer podcast work? It's based on the 6 degrees of separation. 6 degrees of separation means that you are within 6 degrees of connections away from anybody in the world. For example, I know person one knows person 2 knows person 3, etc., up to 6 people, and that 6th person could be anybody in the world, and you are within that connection. Nowadays, they are saying that connection is actually closer to about 4.2, 4.3 people away from you to get to anybody in the world. Through social media, I believe, has played a big impact on that. But this is kind of what the podcast has been based off of. How the podcast really is going to work: we're going to have 6 episodes in each series. So I will then pick the very first guest. That will be the only guest I end up picking. From there, the subsequent guest will end up picking another guest. This is their opportunity to actually impact the podcast in their own way. This takes away any pre-written narrative from me. I don't have any goals other than to just connect with others on this podcast and expand my social circle, as I explained earlier. So what's going to end up happening is, as they pick the next guest, who they are going to introduce to me, that will end up happening 5 times total, where I will then meet or have an interview with about 6 people on the podcast. The goal of this is, at the end, if there ever is an end, is to essentially bring people into a new social circle that they might not have already been into, or maybe share their story to an audience that really cares about, everybody has their own story. Everybody has something that's interesting to them. Everybody has something that is exciting to learn about. There's always people with different perspectives. And I think that this is really good for our society to see. And I'm going to try to challenge a lot of these people, ask them different questions, talk about different failures that they might have had in their life, but then also just hear about how they got to where they are and how our paths have crossed. So if you guys are interested, if you're a future guest, future listener, I really encourage you to kind of open up our minds, connect with others, and join me on this ride. Let's get 6 degrees closer. Thank you.